and Premier.
This was the week, as the Financial Times put it, when she would undertake
the vexed task of reassuring the faithful.
Or as Hugo Young put it in The Guardian,
the marketing event of the year will become a decisive and not merely a cosmetic happening. The image will not prettify the message, it will be the message.
Nicely put, and all very true, except that the marketing event of the year for me was achieved by the unlikely team of a colonel's daughter from Wiltshire and a socialist millionaire from Czechoslovakia. And the message of the week was that coming from the Broadwater Farm Estate in Tottenham. On the day the conference began, these were the headlines in the three true blue populars. The Daily Mail.
The Battle of Broadwater Farm.
Primed for violence.
Ammunition loaded in a trolley.
The Daily Express.
Siege of Fort Broadwater.
And never knowingly undersold, The Sun.
We saw him butchered.
The Sun reported the reactions of the man who was to become, both literally and metaphorically, the bête noire of Fleet Street.
Black Council leader Bernie Grant last night refused to condemn the Tottenham rioters and put the blame for the bloodbath on the police.
In case anyone had difficulty reading the subtext, The Sun spelt it out.
Mr. Grant, known to opponents as Balmy Bernie, said,
maybe it was a policeman who stabbed another policeman. I don't know the circumstances.
Now, that was admittedly a pretty strange remark, even if Mr. Grant has subsequently qualified it. But let us follow that thought for a moment. From 1962 to 1968, I covered race riots in the United States. And I found that if you knew someone's politics, you could predict without fail what explanations they would give for riots. And this week in Britain, nothing much had changed. The American radicals thought that riots were political insurrections, the wretched of the earth rising against their oppressors.
White Heat Lane.
Handsworth, Brixton, Toxteth, Peckham, and now Tottenham. Any pretense that these are outbreaks of mass crime must begin to strike even Geoffrey Archer as a ludicrous reading of what has been taking place on British streets during the summer-autumn of 1985. The stirrings of a war between sections of both black and white youth and the police would seem a more apt interpretation.
By contrast, the American liberals thought riots were caused by bad housing and unemployment. And sure enough, there was this in Tuesday's leader in The Guardian.
Look at Lambeth, of which Brixton forms such a restless part. Since 1981, unemployment has doubled, new house building is halved, central government aid is £15 million down. That is what we have done to our inner cities, tinkered amid growing neglect.
To be fair, The Guardian's leader was not merely arguing that social deprivation causes riots.
The real bad news is that we have become a nation of tinderbox ghettos.
The American conservatives were forever blaming the riots on drug dealers and outside agitators. Well, here was our leading conservative newspaper on Tuesday.
Trotsky plot, claim.
Intelligence reports collated by special branch detectives have indicated that a well-orchestrated conspiracy among Trotskyites, anarchists and other extremists is operating to cause trouble and in some cases has led to inner-city riots.
What the Telegraph reported in sober prose as one possible explanation was taken for granted by the Star.
Still, the rent-a-quote army of politicians and sociologists spout a new bucketful of pseudo-scientific humbug to explain the outrage away. Obviously, sick-minded agitators with no regard for democracy, far less human decency, were at work in the background.
Again, to be fair, both the Telegraph and the Star were quoting the highest levels of the police.
Sir Kenneth Newman, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, also claimed that there was evidence that political agitators, anarchists and Marxists among them, had been active in fomenting unrest.
In briefings to reporters, the police went even further.
We know leaders of trouble, say Yard.
Special branch detectives have identified 2 men at the centre of the rioting and looting in Birmingham, Brixton and Tottenham. They were seen organising gangs during the height of the violence in the 3 riots during recent weeks. Their identification by Scotland Yard proves...
I'm not sure proves is quite the right word.
...that activists have been touring areas of racial tension and orchestrating unrest. One of the men identified by Special Branch, both are coloured and in their 20s, have been known to the Yard for more than 5 years.
The Times was less successful than Special Branch claimed to be at tracking down these outside political agitators.
Far left exerts little influence in riot areas.
Was the headline on one of the first balanced attempts to investigate the truth of this matter that I saw in any paper.
I was in Toxteth, Handsworth, Brixton,
said the fierce young Irishman from Mullingar with a sheaf of the news line under his arm. He also said he had once been in the IRA, but he was finding it hard going on the Broadwater Farm Estate in Tottenham yesterday. He and 2 other members of the Workers' Revolutionary Party admitted they had never been there before and had only been to the other places after the riots.
The reporters, Richard Dowden and Rupert Morris, made this interesting suggestion.
A further possible influence on events in Brixton and Tottenham is the network of black activists which came together in the aftermath of the Terry May case, in which several black youths were jailed, some blacks thought unfairly, after the killing of a crippled white youth in Thornton Heath, southeast London, in June 1981, against a background of racist attacks on black people.
Of course, being a policeman on the front line of the inner city is hard and thankless, but it's a statement of plain fact that behind each of these riots, there's been anger at some incident in the daily conflict between police and inner city people. It can be a raid or simply an attempted arrest. Hugo Young put it neatly today in his column in The Guardian.
The police are sometimes at fault and have come to be seen by entirely innocent people in some parts of London as a source of terror.
The point is that if the problem is one of relations between police and inner city people, that's what we should be concentrating on, not class war or unemployment or outside agitators. That, for me, is the true lesson our papers can draw from the American experience. Of course, we can always fall back on generalities, like Mr. Norman Tebbit.
Mr. Tebbit, Conservative Party chairman, last night suggested that
Wickedness
was a prime cause of the Tottenham riots.
There is indeed a lot of it about. And Mr. Tebbit was faced with wickedness a bit nearer home, as the Sunday papers reminded him as he was packing his bags for Blackpool.
Vengeance of Pillow Talk Sarah.
Sarah's shock secrets give Maggie the jitters.
I'm thinking of marketing a bumper sticker. Fleet Street editors, it will say, have it both ways. A certain professional hypocrisy, in fact, comes with the green eyeshade. The Daily Mail were first off the mark last Friday.
Sarah's book at bedtime will rock the Tories.
The Conservative Party conference could be rocked by the detailed revelations of the former secretary and mistress of Cecil Parkinson, Sarah Keyes.
A note of criticism showed through the Mail's mainly factual reporting.
For the time, it has been disclosed how careful and calculating Miss Keyes was to document every aspect of her relationship with Cecil Parkinson. Mr. Graham Lee of her publishers, Quintessential Press, described her evidence as
Brilliantly documented.
over the years she kept tape recordings and shorthand notes.
Behind the scenes, an auction was going on. As the Sunday Times reported, it involved
A publishing property that has set Fleet Street's ears, tongues, and checkbooks flapping. A bland press release hit the desks of Fleet Street editors announcing the forthcoming publication of
A sensational new book.
The publishers were the unknown Quintessential Press of Westminster, run by Graham Lee. Inquiries quickly established that he was a friend of Keyes and had little publishing experience.
two proprietors dominate Fleet Street these days, Rupert Murdoch and Robert Maxwell. Their rivalry has been proverbial since Murdoch beat Maxwell for control of the News of the World in 1969. One dimension of the Sarah Keyes affair was that it was going to be another round in the unending bare-knuckles battle between those two old bruisers.
By Friday, the race to buy the Kiss and Tell story had narrowed to the News of the World and the Mirror. The former backing out because it said Miss Keyes would only discuss a price if it topped £100,000.
There's something of a mystery about the price. What's clear is that the Murdoch papers, the Sun and the News of the World, bid for the book, but Maxwell won. Already by Saturday, the political dimension of the affair was out in the open.
Edgy top Tories ask,
What will Sarah say?
The publishers said it was possible that it could be launched before or during the Tory conference, which starts in Blackpool next Tuesday. The Tories are keen to have a good conference after the successful meetings of both Liberals and SDP and Labour leader Neil Kinnock's personal triumph in Bournemouth.
Quite. Which was no doubt one reason why the non-Murdoch-owned Conservative papers had made their minds up about Miss Keyes and her book in no uncertain fashion. The Mail's approach was pseudo-medical.
When the diary becomes a dagger.
Was the headline over a fistful of quotes like this.
Dr. Annette Lawson of the Center for Research on Women at Stanford University in California says,
Some people do write diaries with an eye to having them published in the future. There's the whole syndrome of buying a diary with a lock on it. You almost feel that perhaps somebody will break the lock one day. Perhaps all those innermost thoughts will be discovered at last. It's the same feeling as beginning an illicit love affair.
Thank you, Doctor. On Monday, the Sun, which had lost the auction, came down strongly against Miss Keyes.
Sarah Keyes may well make a fortune out of hawking around the story of her love affair with Cecil Parkinson. One day, her little daughter will come home from school in tears after being taunted by other children who know every last detail of the circumstances of her birth. What will Mother do then? Go on counting her money?
That takes some whacking for sheer hypocrisy, doesn't it? First, you offer a woman several tens of thousands of pounds to tell all about her love affair. Then, when you lose the auction, you turn around and accuse her of not caring for her child's future. By Monday, the Daily Mail had worked itself up into a lather about the effect the Keyes revelations could have on the Tory conference.
Ex-mistress and socialist millionaire try to wreck conference.
Sarah's book deal.
Is politics of the gutter.
Tory members of Parliament were getting excited too.
Peter Brunville's Leicester East said,
She may be a woman scorned, but this is despicable. She's a super bitch, unforgiving and ruthless.
Mrs. Thatcher was said to be...
Too busy.
to take the slightest interest. But party chairman Norman Tebbit described the book as...
Trivia.
And...
gutter politics.
The Star, with sublime professionalism, saw this as a subject for a reader's quiz.
Is Sarah Keyes a supermum or a super bitch? Should she expose her child and the Parkinson family to such public limelight? We want to hear your views, for or against. Letters, please, to Sarah Problems, The Star, 33 St Bride Street, London, EC4A 4AY.
The Mirror's view, predictably, was a decided one.
savaged, insulted.
The woman who has rocked the Tories.
Sarah's battle.
From the headline hysteria and the typographical hyperbole, you would have thought it was the Battle of Stalingrad. Naturally, too, the Mirror took a high line.
Had she not written this book, we would have lost a fascinating revelation of low standards in high places.
The copy was written rather powerfully, I thought, by Joe Haynes, the Mirror's political editor and a former press secretary of Harold Wilson's at number 10 Downing Street, where he had plenty of opportunity to become an expert on the standards to be found in high places. But it has to be said that he had a couple of strong points. As Keyes' book speaks, he said,
Of how ministers, from the Prime Minister down, were more concerned about doing what was right for Mr. Parkinson than doing right by Miss Keyes and her unborn child. Of how Norman Tebbit, for example, who now sits in Mr. Parkinson's old post as chairman of the Tory party, told Miss Keyes' lover,
as Sarah Keyes records,
That he would be a fool to truck up a promising career for me.
the Mirror certainly pulled out all the stops. Monday,
World exclusive.
Sarah Keyes.
The story I had to tell.
Tuesday,
Sarah Keyes.
You're not thinking of having the baby, are you?
Cecil Parkinson talking.
Wednesday,
Sarah Keyes.
The day Mrs. Thatcher burned my father's letter.
Thursday,
Sarah Keyes.
My battle for Flora's future. If Cecil thought he could buy my silence, then he could keep his money.
and this morning,
Sarah Keyes.
Betrayed. If love is blind, then it was never more so than in my case.
Sarah Keyes this morning summed up.
Not one Conservative MP ever spoke out publicly on my behalf, then or at any other time. But there were many ministers and backbenchers who volunteered their support and approval for Cecil.
I do think the Tories may be making a mistake in dismissing the Keyes affair altogether. For the picture the memoirs paint of Mr. Parkinson, Mr. Tebbit and Mrs. Thatcher must surely be very unedifying. Though, thanks to Fleet Street, perhaps not as damaging as Mr. Bernie Grant's remarks may prove to Labour. Good night.
In the light of the current financial crisis that faces the arts in Britain, the guest on this week's Face the Press is the chairman of the Arts Council, Sir William Rees-Mogg, and that's on Sunday at 1:30. Well, in a couple of minutes, troubles ahead for the Conservative Party, the fears and threats of Ulster Protestants, and Bernie Grant, leader of Haringey Council, on riots and inner-city policies in A Week in Politics.
In 1983, Legal & General were investors in an oil company drilling in Muckluck, Alaska. Months later, they struck. Water. Not much luck in Muckluck. In 1977, Legal & General had shares in a company selling sprays to deal with Australia's perennial fly problem. But the drought killed off all the flies anyway. However, you have to speculate to accumulate. And despite the odd hiccup, Legal & General have doubled the value of their investments in the last 5 years, which is very good news for anyone who's got their money with us. Legal & General, only 99% certain of getting it right.
Many New Zealand lamb prices are down. So cash in on the price countdown offers where you buy your New Zealand lamb.
On Sunday, the business programme is back, coming to you from this studio in the heart of London's Docklands. Each week, we'll be keeping you in touch with what's going on in Britain's financial marketplace just up the river in the City of London. And here and abroad, we'll be covering events of interest to all those who take business decisions or just like watching other people take them.